Welcome to the panel. MB Power plays a significant economic role in this province. It provides electricity for 400,000 direct and indirect customers, and it employs 2,600 people. It's a Crown corporation that has won industry awards for its health and safety culture, and in 2018 it won a National Energy Star Award for Provincial Utility of the Year. It is a multi-billion-dollar company which, in its most recent financial statement in March of 2022, this year, reported revenues of $80 million. And as you probably know, MB Power is no stranger to controversy. In 2019, the utility initiated a $13 million investment in Joy Scientific, a company which claimed it had developed a technology to turn the hydrogen in seawater into electricity, an investment plan the New Brunswick government put a stop to. There are also some big questions about subsidies to New Brunswick's pulp and paper mills, subsidies which have reached $101 million since 2012. There are also questions about leadership at the corporation. MB Power's board of directors fired CEO Keith Cronkite this year after he had been on the job for only 2 years. And of course, there is controversy. There is always controversy over rate increases. The corporation wants to raise power rates by 8.9% beginning this coming April. There are also questions about MB Power's role in the proposal to build small modular reactors. And there are questions about MB Power's commitment to developing renewable energy, such as solar power and wind-generated power. So, joining me today to discuss these questions and others, Minister of Energy for New Brunswick, Minister of Energy and Resource Development, Mike Holland is here. Here for the Liberal Party is Keith Chiasson, the critic for energy development, and the leader of the Green Party, David Coon, is here as well. Welcome to you all. Thanks for being here.
Thanks,
Pleasure.
Mr. Holland, I want to start with you. How satisfied are you with the performance of MB Power Management? Is this a well-run company?
Well, I think we've evidenced over the last year, probably over a year ago now, when we were getting results that were coming in quarter after quarter that weren't meeting targets, that we had said, and I think I'm in the media quite publicly saying that, no, this is not performing at the level that it needs to. We've recognized that there are certain things that need attention, and there have been some pretty transformational steps taken.
Such as?
Well, I mean, I don't think we can recall a time when the CEO of the organization was removed from the position and an independent body such as PricewaterhouseCoopers brought in to really do a deep dive and find out, how can we do better here? And the old saying is, if you know better, you got to do better. And essentially, we had said for a while now that the bones of something great is there, but there's some things that need improvement because we have to get on track with meeting targets. And I mean, as everybody knows, over the last year, energy's taken on a much more significant role as its importance throughout the entire globe. So, and we're embarking upon some world-leading projects, and we need to make sure that everything is as right and tight as it can be. So we're totally transparent in saying that instead of standing in as governments have done for many, many years, saying, oh, all is well here, we've said that, no, I think we have to dig in and do better. So that's a broad statement. I'm sure we'll unpack it. But no, we've said that we need to see improvement from the utility.
Okay, let's start unpacking. What needs improvement?
Well, I mean, you've got a couple of things that have probably led to some of these circumstances. The first thing we needed to do was make a clear statement that we've got to get out of the hands off, the politicians. We've seen election campaigns that have said, vote for us and we'll freeze the rates. There's been government intervention with the utility to invest in certain things. It's a Crown corporation. We're the shareholder, absolutely, and there's a lot of things where we offer advice and whatnot, but we've got to depoliticize the utility.
Let me jump in there, because you say government needs to be hands-off, but you're the person who stepped in and said, no more money on Joy Scientific. I mean, that's not hands-off.
Yeah, well, absolutely, because I'm looking at that from the perspective of, I understand, we were relatively new to governing at that point, but really quickly we saw that this was going down a direction that was not going to yield any results. And when politicians step in and say, hold on here, because they're representing and protecting the revenue that is going to be reflected in ratepayers or taxpayers, that's a little different than politicizing it by saying, vote for me and I'll freeze the rates. That sounds good on the surface, but this is a corporation that requires revenue to operate, and those rate freezes have cost, you could probably directly correlate about $1 billion or so of their debt to those political movements. Now, stepping in and saying, this is not going to go anywhere, stop spending money, is in my opinion different than electioneering or whatnot with limiting or capping the utilities' ability to raise money.
I guess some people might wonder why it took the expenditure of $13 million before government stepped in and said enough.
Part of that reason is the ink was still wet on our signing in papers when we first started and seen that. And I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form as a reflection on previous government. We've done that too many times. Like, the Liberals will blame Conservatives, Conservatives blame. I'm not drawing that comparison, but that's when it was. Is we acted rather quickly on it because it was one of the first files. I think we did a political panel on it before, and I was like 3 or 4 weeks into the job.
Right.
So we did act on it rather quickly from the time we had control of the of government.
Mr. Chiasson, from your point of view, is MB Power a well-run company? Are you satisfied with how management is running things?
Well, they got a lot of work to do to earn the trust of the people in New Brunswick. They don't have the best track record, and if we think of the power rates, I think one of the big issues with is the fact that why are they turning to us to help them out with their operation costs? And it comes down to trust. The minister mentioned that they're trying to cut excess, so they have hired PricewaterhouseCoopers. I think what I would have liked to seen was that, listen, do NB Power, let PricewaterhouseCoopers do their job. Let's see what they come out, at the end. Let's see them maybe cut some of their costs and operations. And then if that's not sufficient, then you can turn to the public and say, okay, listen, we need your help to cover the gap.
Where do you see an opportunity to cut costs?
I think it's in operations. I think it's management. I think it's, and we've seen it with, they come out with a buyout package, I think just a couple of weeks ago. So, I'm not in the position where I'm actually in the office of MB Power, but from what I'm hearing is that there's substantial costs that could be saved just through management. So it's just restructuring, lean management kind of approach. And, and I think people are conscious of the fact that alone won't resolve the entire problem. But I think if MB Power comes out and says, listen, we've done our due diligence, we've done our work, this is what we're willing to do to cut costs, but we also need the help of the taxpayers, of the shareholders.
I think I'm hearing you say that from your point of view, MB Power is management top heavy, or
no, that's from what I'm hearing. Obviously, again, I'm not in the mix of exactly how it's run, but from what I'm hearing is they've got a lot of costs in upper management.
Okay, it's funny you mention that because I did some research before I came here today, and I just looked at salary levels, and one person makes between $400,000 and $424. One person makes between $325 and $350. But then you go down the list, and there's 161 people making between $150,000 and $175,000. 461 people making between 125 and 150. 788 people make between 100 and 125. Does that seem unreasonable?
It's hard for me to comment on that. I mean, I don't want this to turn out to be a witch hunt where we're going to go after people and say, "Oh, listen."
But you said it's top heavy.
It is top heavy, and but this is public perception also. When you ask people, just on the streets, say, "Okay, listen, what do you think of MB Power?" Well, they're saying, "Well, listen, they've got high salaried people running the operation." And, for them, it's a concern where it's like, well, why are they always turning to us, to help them with their operation costs or, to fill gaps where, there are some.
Mr. Holland, you wanted to jump in.
I think, there's some affirmation in what you're saying there. And the conversation that I've had with them is, and I'll be the first one to say, I will never begrudge linemen, workers, the rank and file folks that we count on to make sure that when you turn that switch on,
people
the lights
are putting their lives on the line.
Absolutely. You know what? sign that overtime, make sure that they're taken care of. Those are the people that stand behind ensuring that those lights turn on when we get there. But I've had the conversation with them to in line with what you're saying, Keith, is everybody needs to be accountable. If you're not on those front lines and you're part of the organizational structure behind NB Power, I've said before, everybody should be able to be brought in a room and explain exactly the value they bring to the table.
Okay.
And I think that whether it be NB Power or whether it be any corporation, that should be the case with your senior level management.
In government as well?
Absolutely.
Okay. David Coon, what's your assessment of NB Power? Do we have the management structure there that we need? Are you happy with how things are being run?
Well, it's interesting because we're in this transitionary period, right? I mean, the board let the CEO go. So when people ask me that question, I say, well, you're talking about the old NB Power with all of its problems. You're talking about the new NB Power, which could be created out of not the ashes, but out of the bones that are there. And I met with the chairman of the board last week, Charles Farlotte. I was really impressed. I think that there's some real possibilities there to bring NB Power, change it, to sort of shift its direction towards the future in this century. It has been sort of following the same model, utility model, for decades and decades and decades, which worked, in the 20th century, but not anymore with technology moving as quickly as it is, so much decentralized, distributed technology, both on the supply side, on the demand side, where utilities can actually manipulate thermostats and fridges and water heaters and heat pumps now, with the permission of the resident, obviously, but to balance demand with supply, that sort of thing. With the climate crisis that's deepening, that we're in the middle of. So the demands are totally different on utility today than was the case in the first century of its operation. So it's got to change, and many utilities around the world have. I just spent a couple of hours on a Zoom call with an expert from Germany who works in utilities and renewable energy policy and strategies with utilities globally. Fascinating what's happening around the world, and it just reaffirmed for me how stuck in New Brunswick our utility has been in the past with what developments have been occurring. You can pick a country. It's incredible what's going on. So what I say is, that the change at the top, the CEO's approach to things, the president's approach to things, and the job ad for the CEO. I don't know if you call the job ad for such a prestigious position, an important position, but anyway, the job posting, I could have written it. So when I read that,
you're happy with it?
Well, when I saw what it was calling for, I thought, all right, we're talking about real change, important change for New Brunswick. So I'm kind of excited to see what this is going to look like. There's a real opportunity. There's lots of leftover problems from the way NB Power has been operating. We're going to have stranded assets that government's going to have to figure out how to mop up, unfortunately. But you can't stand still and sit in the past because you're going to create stranded assets. You got to figure out how to deal with them. Other utilities are having to deal with them. We're going to have to deal with them as a province.
One second.
But I'm quite hopeful in a sense that we're going to see fundamental change in the utility. We'll be looking at new revenue sources, perhaps from renting heat pumps, renting solar panels to people on their roofs, all kinds of possibilities.
Are you happy with how government oversees NB Power now? Is there sufficient oversight?
Well, the oversight happens in two ways. The Energy Utilities Board,
right,
which it has power strengthened a bit. They were watered down some years ago, but it does a good job for what it has in place for legislation. The Electricity Act, however, needs to be improved. So the other direction NB Power gets, without sort of political meddling, but from the legislature in the Electricity Act, that's their governing statute, and it lays out things it's supposed to be achieving. For example, to meet in order to meet the target for renewable energy, it's in the Electricity Act, it's in regulation. MB Power has to meet this percentage of its sales from renewable energy sources. That hasn't been touched in really fundamentally in 15 years, so it needs to be expanded, improved upon to really help drive the energy transition. Now, it may be in the end that it's only the Greens are going to be the spearhead of that renewable energy transition, but it does need to be updated. And I think we should go for broke. We are in a position in New Brunswick to be able to.
Broke's a pretty dangerous proposition to make.
And
it's easy to say that if you're sitting in a position where don't have to balance all of the consequences intended or otherwise.
Let me just finish. I think there's tremendous opportunities for revenue if we go, say, 200% renewable to generate surpluses, because where we are geographically positioned, New England is just crying for green renewable energy. Nova Scotia needs a lot of help to get off all that coal. And we are in a great position to do that if we go down the road to 200% renewables.
Okay.
What a great thing.
A couple of things. I'm going to back up there to the fact that I appreciate David's points about the utility and would agree with almost everything that was said. Actually, I agree with everything he was saying, but there's one more step here. And what we can't lose sight of is the fact that there is an independent, well-respected, third-party body in the form of PricewaterhouseCoopers, that it's not just the removing a CEO and then putting a new one in and then let's carry on. Pricewaterhouse is going to come back with some recommendations with some teeth, and I met with them early on when they did this, and one of the things I was really impressed with was it wasn't just rank and file employees from Pricewaterhouse. It was folks who had experience in the utility field in situations very similar to this. So when that comes forward, I'm encouraged by the credibility behind who's doing it. And they're going to be bringing back some significance with what they're saying, which will hopefully help guide us and tell us where we may need to correct drift.
Right, but you just don't call in a firm like that and say, okay, do what you want. Government says, here's what we're looking for. Here's what we want you to look at.
Yeah.
So what did you tell them you wanted them to look at?
Well, let's look at the obvious. I mean, here we are in a situation where you've got a company that does $1 billion worth of revenue with $5 billion worth of debt. Okay, we've got to address that. We have to figure out. So what has happened? What's led to the accumulation of that debt? How do we ensure that we don't continue to grow that debt? What have we done that's limited their ability to generate revenue in order to service that debt?
The Auditor General pointed out where the debt came from. 2/3 of it is from going into nuclear power. 2/3 of the debt comes from
at the end of the
Pro-1
day,
and
we're
Tennessee
sitting here
Virgin.
with a certain amount of revenue, trying to figure out how to pay down that debt, regardless of sourcing of it. You could source it there. You could source it with political interference. You could come up with a number of reasons why it's sitting there. But what are you going to do about it?
It's the reality.
What are you going to do about it?
You said they're going to look at where that debt came from. Well, we know where the debt came from.
Okay.
2/3 of the debt came from going into the nuclear
Look,
option.
so once it's identified, then you have to determine where you are going to go to get on top of it, because
Right.
we have mandated that we need to get that under control. Because regardless of the direction the utility goes in, beyond just flicking switches and making sure lights are on, if you do not have that utility moving in a trajectory of financial health, you've got an issue. So quite frankly, we have got to ensure that we're putting together a plan that meets financial objectives. Housed within that umbrella is, of course, all of the objectives we have and mandates that are coming at us from the federal government about carbon, moving towards renewables, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, but first and foremost, where's our plan financially to move forward?
Did you tell the accounting firm that you wanted a smaller utility, a smaller, leaner utility?
No, because that would presuppose that I had subject matter expertise that would be beyond theirs, and I don't.
But what was their marching order? What did you say we want?
Oh, well, the marching order came from the board of NB Power.
And what does it want?
Well, the NB Power basically had indicated to them, now, mind you, I did not give that mandate to Pricewaterhouse. We were informed that was being brought in with the purpose of, like I said, identifying financial issues, identifying logistic issues, basically run through our organization and tell me how we can come out through the other side and do
But
better.
government does send NB Power, a mandate letter.
Yes.
They did receive a mandate letter in 2021, and it specifically says that they've got to reduce their debt to equity ratio
By 80%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By
by
2027.
2027, exactly. So they did get marching orders, and the question that you asked about oversight, I think that's actually a really interesting one, because we've been questioning government on where is the oversight. So David mentioned the EUB. So the EUB does have a role to play. I mean, obviously NB Power is at arm's length. The EUB is completely independent, but what we're seeing in the last few years is that they're playing around with the EUB, where it's like, sometimes we're going to say, well, no, it's an EUB decision. Sometimes they're going to say, well, we want the EUB out of this, completely out of the decision. We think of Mactaquac. They brought in legislation to completely remove them.
You know that.
And then the other
We
part
talked
is,
about that in the legislature,
when it
where I
comes to
said that-
EUB, they want to
Hold on,
bring in, when
okay,
they're talking about diesel fuel, they said, well, listen, we want to, be able to override an EUB decision. So I think there's work to be done to be able to say, okay, listen, like if we're going to offer oversight, and there has to be oversight from government. Obviously, we're the taxpayers, we're the shareholders of MD Power. We can't completely say, listen, we don't want nothing to do with, with what's going on, how it's operated. I understand it's got to be independent, but we got to find ways to be able to have good oversight on what's being done with NB Power. And I think we've been kind of flip-flopping the last couple of years, where it's like it hasn't been clear, even though they did receive a mandate letter.
Right, because I can remember a time when government was more heavily involved in,
Yes.
in the day-to-day operations
Yeah.
of MB Power, or the month-to-month, or year-to-year, whatever you want to do. And then they withdrew because MB Power said, look, you got to let us do our thing.
But they didn't really withdraw,
No.
as we saw, because the governments kept playing around with power rate caps and power rate
But that's
reduction.
Right.
But now we're in a situation where today, and regardless of political party, or regardless of who was in power at what point, I think we've got to be past all of that rhetoric and say that decisions have led to a situation where the utility has to do better. And in situations like the EUB and oversight, I mean, we absolutely stand behind the need for the EUB to be there. A project like Mactaquac, we said the scope goes far beyond what the EUB's typical oversight would be. So it is going to involve decisions beyond that. I mean, with Mactaquac, here's the thing. I mean, at the end of the day, no action is not acceptable on that, and we know that we need the lens of the EUB on the financial component, and they're certainly going to be invited to be there. But that project will go beyond the scope of just the EUB. We don't want to be in a position where we're giving direction of that. We want them to have clear direction, and we want them to be able to give us that objective advice again, which is in a form oversight. And then get away from the things that we've done in the past, essentially. And it's a blend to what we're talking about here. It's not micromanaging day to day, and it's not complete arm's length. And so the days come where we've got to find that balance where we can go forward with this utility with oversight of the shareholder in a reasonable and responsible fashion, and autonomy on behalf of the Crown Corporation. As long as we're achieving goals, that's what we've got to get to.
Okay, so Mr. Holland, MB Power has indicated it wants to proceed with the refurbishment of Mactaquac.
Yeah.
So if the accounting firm does its review and says, that might not be the smartest thing for you to do, what would government do then? MB Power wants to do it. The accounting firm that you've put into, or the board of directors has put in place says no. What happens?
Well, I mean, at that point, we've got to have a discussion about what options are available. And I think that on projects like that, and that's where I was going with it, no action is not an option with Mactaquac, but what options are available? If that winds up being too expensive, are there options where portions can be done? What can we do to break that down? Maybe make it less expensive. Is there we've got to have a look at all of these things, because that plays such a significant role in the renewable energy that we have in the province of New Brunswick, considering where we need to go. We cannot lose ground on emitting energy technology, so we have to figure out what it's going to take to do that. Now that's going to require some creativity, and I can't presuppose the income about that, but then we have to have a real transparent and honest conversation with everybody, and by everybody I mean the utility, the government, opposition and the citizens of Brunswick to say, here we have a situation, and lay options out in front, and then we're going to have to choose from that menu and
But
figure
that's what
out.
we've been missing, you know. I mean, government hasn't put out before people of this province, what are the different energy pathways that are open to us?
Well,
What are-
absolutely.
What are those pathways? So how do you expect to have a public debate when those pathways are not evident to people? You know, what's the 200% renewable pathway I was talking about, where we actually, you know, use the renewables for our own purposes and then have more to sell to our neighbors? What's the sort of status quo pathway if we don't do anything? Where's that headed? You know, what's that SMR pathway that you're quite fond of? What does that look like? You know, if
Did you
we,
detect a little cynicism in his voice when he
So-
said that?
so-
That's a bit of a point.
so lay out the pathways for
Fair, you
people,
know,
right?
But I agree
Fair
with
enough.
David on that, where it's like, I think the process needs a little bit more transparency, because generation is going to be one of the biggest
Yeah.
hurdles for NV Power in the coming years. Obviously, you know, we're going to have to generate more electricity. Our consumption is actually going to grow. There is no energy plan out there, and we have to diversify also with the energy plan. So when we talk about Mactaquac, I think the perception from the outside looking in is like, well, so government kind of pushed aside EUB. So what's going to happen now? So is this going to be one person making the decision on behalf of, you know, of the corporation? Like, so I think there's got to be that discussion, that open discussion. Okay, this is how we're going to move forward. So I agree with David on this. Like, there's got to be transparency. I think
Well, and I must-
that'll bring assurance, and I think that's the change in culture that we're expecting, and people are expecting from
That's a
NV
good
Power.
line. I mean, that change in culture, and I must have hit my head on the way in, because I'm going to agree with David as well on the fact
There's
that
nothing wrong with that. This is a place where people
actually
can
the
agree.
truth of the matter is we have a lot of fun, but there's a number
Doesn't
of
happen
times that
often.
we find ourselves aligned, and absolutely. I mean, I mean, you'd have to live under a rock to not hear the promotion that I've done on the SMR file.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, it has to be coupled with renewables, and the discussion on renewables has to be coupled with the balancing act of it being non-firm power.
You know what my
You know what?
takeaway from all of this is that the future of Mactaquac is up in the air again.
Well, you know what? At the end of the day, we have to get that figured out. But I don't have any answers here today. And
Okay.
other than the fact that I will tell you that it is going to be a situation that's going to require in order to get through it, we're all going to have to take off our hats about picking and fighting and arguing with each other and say, this is a New Brunswick issue, and how are we going to work together transparently to get it fixed.
Okay, let me just move us in a different direction. How comfortable are you with an 8.9% increase in rates?
The 8.9% rate increase, as any rate increase that the utility goes before the EUB with, I'm okay with that process, right? What you have to look at is the utility. We've had conversations where they said during COVID the last couple of years everything was frozen. For the 10 years prior to that, the average rate increase was 1.8%. Wasn't keeping up, and they were going behind. Yet I was mandating them, us as the government was mandating them to meet debt reduction targets. And so what we've told them is, you know, you put together a rate increase that's real. Put it together. And, you know, we're not going to be a government that mandates a vote for me and will freeze your rates. So put it together. So the utility put together that 8.9% rate increase, and it's going to put it before the EUB, and then it'll come back. Okay. So I just want to go a little bit further, because I want to make a point about what they got to do afterwards. The EUB will come back and say, 100%, you were right. We're going to give you 8.9%. Or they're going to come back and say, we've discounted and disqualified these items, this item, and this item. In the past, what's happened is that if they were looking for a 4% rate increase and they got 2%, there's 2% of their projected spending that needed to stop, and sometimes it continued. Well, that's a recipe in the private sector that's going to mean it's going to put you upside down your balance sheet, and you can't do that. So whatever the EUB comes back with, we have confidence in their objectivity, and they'll give them whatever that projected rate increase needs to be to keep them on track. Because you got to remember, $110 million extra in fuel cost alone this year for the utility. So were we surprised that there was going to be an increase? No, I mean, just simply because of all of the extra costs that were coming, you know, we knew that the rate increase was going to be higher. And it was artificially kept lower because of COVID, and then politics before that. So.
Okay.
Let's
so-
remember, though, that the EUB, the quality of the EUB decision is not based on the quality of the EUB. It's based on the quality of the evidence brought
Right.
before them. Because
point.
essentially, when a power rate application comes forward from MB Power, the EUB puts it on trial. It's on trial.
Yes.
They're like judges.
Yeah.
And they hear evidence from interveners, from large energy consumers, small energy consumers. Hopefully, if the minister decides to provide intervener funding from well-funded citizens groups, any poverty
Will you provide
organizations.
intervener funding?
What's that?
Will you provide intervener funding?
Well, we have the ability, yes, the
Good.
short answer is.
Good.
Okay, all right.
You heard it
I
here
hope I'm going
first.
to get a chance to talk about this power rate.
So-
You're gonna
Yes,
get to-
you are. Yeah, but
Okay.
let me just ask the minister
Okay.
one more question. Okay,
Yeah.
so you ordered the corporation to reduce its debt to 80% of equity by 2027, and by law, the only way MB Power can raise revenue is to increase rates. So how much responsibility do you take for the rate increase? Does your government?
Oh, I believe governments have a significant role to play on that, but at the end of the day, we also put forward legislation that allowed the utility to have other opportunities to create revenue other than raising rates.
So
that
holding company.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I mean, and that's relatively new to it. But we did recognize that they were being handcuffed with the only way to raise revenue to be raising the rates. So we have taken some steps towards doing
Okay,
that.
Mr. Chiasson, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think if MB Power, like from my understanding, when they came out with the increase in the rate or the demand to increase the rates, it was strictly to cover the operation costs. So the increases in fuel and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't to bring down the debt. It wasn't to invest in maybe new technology. It was basically for the operation. I think the issue that I've got with that is, well, we've seen this coming, since the pandemic. So I wanted to know what were there discussions with the government beforehand, saying, listen, like we're kind of losing this fight here, whereas our expenses are increasing just to keep the lights on, and we can't keep up. And there are different measures. Maybe at that time, obviously with the huge surpluses that governments have recorded the last few years, was there something else that could have been
There
done
was.
to be able
There
to
was
help?
things done because we had conversations with the utility.
Yeah.
And they had basically indicated that, we have increased costs, we project them coming.
Yeah.
We've frozen the rates during COVID in order to offer some relief to New Brunswickers. And that's where the genesis of the conversation came from us about opening up the Electricity Act to talk about a number of different means with which we could give them more flexibility and opportunities to create additional
Well,
revenue.
maybe
So I
that-
guess some steps were being taken. The conversation was taking place. Did it wind up being like a silver bullet or a magic wand? No, not necessarily. But we were tone deaf to conversation, and we've been
But
having
people
that.
understand that obviously there's increases. We've all, obviously with food, gas, we've all lived it since the beginning
Everything.
of the pandemic. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
What's gone down?
and people are very open to that, and the utility's not sheltered from those increases. The thing is for example, MB Power last year paid out $50 million to the province for property taxes, utility taxes, and stuff like that. So the person just looking at that saying, well, listen, why couldn't the government just, with the surplus that we recorded, why couldn't they say, listen, for this year, we're going to put that aside. Let's try and maybe give time to PricewaterhouseCoopers to do their work. To see if we can shave some excess, and then if that doesn't work, well then at least we'll have justification to come back to the shareholders and say, listen, I think we can't fill the gap. We need some help.
Well, I mean, we like as I finished with saying, we put legislation together. The utilities come forward in the process period where Pricewaterhouse is reviewing everything and said that they're projecting about $50 million worth of savings. So that work is taking place. And at the end of the day, the rate increase, as you had indicated, is not going to be for above and beyond covering their operating costs and getting them through the year. The other side of that is that they're working to lower those operating costs. I am encouraged by what I've seen come out of the board and with Chuck and what the steps that they say they're going to take. There are going to be recommendations that hopefully will lead to lower operating costs. And then the EUB is going to come back and say, well, no, 8.9 doesn't do it, or you need 13.2. Who knows, right? So that independent process is going to allow us to get through it.
You
too.
made a point earlier about relief for New Brunswickers from rates. Are you familiar with the term energy poverty?
I can only, I would make an assumption what it would mean.
Okay,
Is that a high cost of energy would be compromising my ability to operate my home on a regular basis. Is that?
There's a definition that says where energy poverty occurs where an individual spends 6% or more of their income on their power needs. So we discussed a moment ago about how New Brunswickers, Canadians, people all over the world, I suppose, are paying more for everything. Fuel, food, you name it, it's gone up. Insurance. So now, rent. So now MB Power says we're going to raise your electricity rate by 8.9%. And in addition to that, you're going to pay 15% HST on your power bill. Why are we charging people who are stretched, many of them barely making ends meet, why are we charging them HST on something as basic as providing warmth for themselves in the winter?
That's a question that would go to the whole of government. And
Well, what do you think?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the fact that the rate that we have here in the province of New Brunswick. And I think there has to be some accounting for the fact that as the minister responsible for MB Power and the Department of Energy, we've got to deal with a whole bunch of things underneath that umbrella. But the extra cost of living and whatnot, that's something that the world's seeing, and it's squeezing us all in ways unlike we've ever seen.
Some jurisdictions are talking about removing the tax on heating.
Well, notwithstanding that specific conversation, and I did an interview this morning where I said, there's one wallet that pays all of our bills, and it's getting squeezed. So items like increasing the basic taxable income to be exempt for income tax on the provincial side, we've done that. Eliminated the interest on student loan debts, we've done that. There's a number of different projects and incentives. The home heating energy efficiency evaluation for people who are $70,000 and under. So there are programs of government that are being done. The reduction of HST on a power bill would be another one of those. And what I said this morning was the government is having conversations continually at a cabinet level and a caucus level about whether there's surplus, whether there be this or that. How can we then take this revenue and convert it into something that offers relief for New Brunswick?
Should we be charging HST on power bills?
No, and he's saying there's a squeeze. There's one wallet. Well, I mean, if that wallet's got $777 million in it, you're going to have to squeeze it a lot to
But now
fill the crunch.
now you're
of
having
it.
a conversation that steps outside of the realm of what I have the authority to talk about
Sure.
here. If you want to talk about something that covers the scope of government, that's legitimate. And what I'm saying outside of the wheelhouse of me as the Minister of Energy, but as a member of Cabinet, is that those conversations have to happen.
But there
I'm not
has to be
saying
an
that they
answer at some point. I mean, you can
Yes.
have conversations endlessly. At some point, somebody has to make a decision. Yes, we're going to drop it. No, we're not.
Well, not about that conversation, but it's not like there's inactivity on that conversation about bringing relief to New Brunswickers. We roll out the energy efficiency program. We've done, I listed off 3 or 4 of them.
Sure.
So that stuff's taking place. To your point, Keith, that's a conversation that is meant to be directed at the whole of government, and it's a legitimate one to have.
And I understand that, but I think the concern is that, and I'm glad you brought up the energy poverty issue, because I think it's hitting, obviously it's hitting New Brunswick. I mean, we're one of the oldest populations in the country. A lot of people are on fixed incomes, very rural. If I think of my neck of the woods, the houses are, they were built in the 50s and 60s, so they're not up to standard of, what we expect to be, a house to be energy efficient. So there's a lot of work to be done, and they're paying a lot on electricity bills, especially in the winter.
David,
Go ahead, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, we
David.
have to make sure that the necessary programs and financing is in place to bring
exactly.
those houses up
Yeah.
to standard, and there's more work to be done on that.
Yeah.
The Expand Energy Savings Program is a start, but first of all, it needs to cover a lot more people more quickly.
But there are a bunch of programs beyond that.
But the programs beyond that are inaccessible still to lots of people because it requires you to spend the money up front. We need provincial financing in order for people to be able to put the money into their homes.
And I don't want to interrupt. 4 years ago, I just would interrupt without permission. But now I'm asking for your permission, because what you're doing is that's sending a message that we don't have programs that cover a wide scope of people.
No, I'm saying you do have programs, but your programs, mostly except the one for people under 70,000 household income, provide rebates after you spend the money up front. That's a huge barrier for a lot of people. So there needs to be financing available up front So people can put the money in investments into upgrading their homes. There needs to be programs directed at landlords to get the rental properties, the older renter properties, up to a better state of energy efficiency to cut the heating costs for the tenants. That's huge.
Nope.
That's a big.
Fair enough.
So these are the kinds of things that can happen in the utility, could have happened in efficiency New Brunswick, are happening in efficiency 1 in Nova Scotia. Their energy efficiency organization.
Do you know what I want to do?
So
do you know what I want to do? And
more?
I think I do more, but I'll drill down into something specific because I use this example all the time, and maybe you've heard me say it, and maybe NB Power's not happy when I do say it, but I'm the Minister of Energy for the province of New Brunswick. I live in a home that was built in the 80s, and it has baseboard heaters. Okay, I should be ashamed of myself, and you probably will chastise me for it someday. Why don't I have mini splits? Why don't I have those energy efficiency audits done?
why don't you?
I don't have time.
Oh,
right?
come on.
No, listen. Now that's an excuse, right?
Yeah, I
that's
guess
an
so.
excuse. But you know what I wish I could do? Pick up the phone and call 1-800-HELP-ME and then have something happen similar to what happens in Nova Scotia. And I use Nova Scotia as an example where a resident of Nova Scotia can pick up the phone and say, you know what, I do want that done. And then the utility takes care of the auditing, the process, whatever, comes out the other side and says, you're going to pay for it, depending on your income level or whatever. And I wouldn't expect to get anything for free, but here's what's going to happen. We're going to do that, and then on your monthly bill, you're going to pay. You'll repay us.
Okay.
I want to do that here.
So that's all good and said and done, but we're not there yet. I mean, obviously,
Well, we're never gonna get there
No, I
unless
know,
we
but the energy
do
efficiency
it.
programs. I mean, you can only install
Hold
so
on.
many
I'm
mini
having,
splits
I'm
a
having
year.
this conversation right now, Keith, and
No, I
I'm
understand
out
that.
publicly saying it.
But I think what we need to do also is we need to, like, the corporation needs to be wary about the power rates and listen, we're going to put in place energy efficiency programs. The rollout is going to be over many, many years before, we be able to hit all these houses. So they've got to be wary of that with the energy rates.
Okay, any opinion on whether or not the HST should apply to power bills?
We need to figure a way to fund removing that. I don't think it should be there. The provincial sales tax didn't apply. When the GST came in, bingo, suddenly there was PST and GST on the power bills.
Explain, what do you mean by funding the removal of it? That's
Well, when
that's catching my interest.
Well, when you're going to remove a significant piece of revenue from government's budget by eliminating that tax, you need to have another source of revenue to replace it.
Okay, so what about this? Because this is leading nicely into the next area I want to bring up for discussion. Why are we still subsidizing large power users?
Well, it's not a subsidy.
It's
not a subsidy.
Really?
We've agreed all the way up
What is your
until that.
definition of subsidy then?
Well, this is a fee-for-service arrangement where they provide a service that we want and we need and we're asking for and we're paying for it, and it operates in a credit system. Instead of paying for it, it's a credit system that buys down power rates.
The reality is,
I don't know what you call it other than a fee-for-service
the
program.
reality is, the NB Power is providing electricity to heavy industry like the pulp mills at less than their cost of supplying it.
Right.
They're selling it for less than the
But-
cost
but
of
hold
supplying
on
it.
for just a
because
second.
Let him make the point. Let him
because
make
the
the
political
point.
decision was taken by a former government to ensure that the heavy industry only paid the average industrial rate for electricity in Canada. And so,
Yes.
so that is the subsidy. It's not based on the cost of
So
the power
you're
for
okay
supplying
with
the
making
power.
sure that our industry is non-competitive with their Canadian.
So-
Is it NB Power's job to make sure that industry is competitive?
well, at the end of the day, if we
That's what.
It could be, because that's one of their largest customer bases. And what would happen if they were not competitive and wound up consuming less? They have an opportunity to lose more revenue if they don't have that customer consuming.
Do you
right?
know Berla's gross income in a year?
No, I don't.
Okay, so it is massive, one of the world's
yeah.
largest companies. So you're saying they wouldn't be operating the mill in Nakawik if they didn't get a subsidy for their company?
They wouldn't be operating that company. Well, hold on now. You're making a broad generalization that needs to be brought down to a provincial level. Large industrial corporations that have fingers that go into all sorts of places could easily continue to operate and then shut down a finger. Don't ever forget that, though.
Okay,
So that's an impossible question to answer, because I don't know what their values are or what they want to do or how much they need that operating, and if the expenses of that particular a satellite location exceeded their ability to handle their stomach for operating it, they could shut it down.
Okay.
But make it explicit. I mean, if you're going to do that, it needs to be explicit, because right now that subsidy to the industrial users is being borne by increased power rates to the residential and small business consumers. So if government wanted to, as it did, decided to ensure that heavy industry didn't pay any more than the average cost for electricity, industrial electricity in the country, it should have been a direct subsidy from government, and then you would have to account for it to the voters.
Or the United States. Right,
Or-
when the
or
United
both.
States looks at the subsidy
Or both.
environment
Well,
for
I
our
think
pulp
that
industry.
that becomes, because I still take issue with calling it a subsidy, because it's, you're producing a product, I'm buying it, we're crediting that to you in the form of your electricity use, and regardless of how that works, if there's more value for what we're buying than what we're selling, then that puts it in a negative balance.
MB Power loses money on the power it sells.
Yeah.
Well, but they're buying.
Why would you
they're
do
buying,
that? Why would anybody do that? Why
But
would
they're
you sell
buying.
something?
They're buying power to put onto the grid.
They're not getting, no, it's not how it works. That's phantom power you're talking about. It's just cooked up. to
So,
make it
so,
look
it's,
like-
so at
It's
the end
a
of the
subsidy
day,
at the
so
end
at
of
the
the
end of the day, well, you know what?
It is.
Semantics. I guess
Yeah.
I'd three
Well,
against
no,
one.
it's an important
Yeah.
point. Is it a subsidy or is
I
it
don't
not?
believe. I don't believe it is. But I'll tell you where.
What
I
is
would-
it then, if
where
it's
I will-
not a subsidy?
It's a fee-for-service program. Now, what I would say.
It's a gift.
We all agree
And you're
to
putting
disagree.
on
We
the
all agree
backs
to
of the
disagree.
other ratepayers.
However, what you're saying is, what I do have an agreement with you is that if there's specificities that need to be placed around it, if there's adjustments that need to be made to it, like I've always said that, like I see where the program's going, but I have no issue, especially in this day and age of us looking at the utility under a microscope with every area. Like that LIREP program would be one that should certainly be brought back and say, is it serving the original purpose? Is there drift that needs to be corrected?
Is it time for a review?
Sure.
Okay, well, why can't you make that review happen?
Well, I think you'll see as a result, and once again, I don't want to presuppose the.
This is the Price Waterhouse.
Well, yeah, I don't want to start cutting their grass or whatever. But when they come back with recommendations, I'm assuming that there's going to be a significant list of them. That may be part of it. If it's not, and it would be
Do
something.
you think it should be?
I think it should be, yeah, for sure. I mean, every 10 years you should review something. I mean, you can't put
And-
something
and
in
that's where I'm-
place
and that's where I'm
and not
going
have a
with that,
review.
yeah.
I think it is in a certain way. Like, I understand the debate here about whether it's a subsidy or not, but at the end of the day, the way most people see it, it's a subsidy. And I think the debate should be around, well, should we subsidize large industry when it comes to electricity?
To help them stay competitive.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it was put in place, obviously, in the late 2000s to help that industry, go. Obviously they were going through a lot of headaches. The pulp and paper price was just dropping.
It was justified then.
It was
So the
justified
question
then,
is,
yeah. So
is
the
it
review
still
is fine.
justified?
And having that conversation is something that
Yep.
that me, in my particular position, having a review of that, absolutely. I have no issue with that.
You would
It is-
endorse that?
The review of it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every program we have has got to stand up to the stark light of day. And now at the end of the day, once it's reviewed, and I've done this before, and when there's been stuff that's been reviewed, and I'm like, okay, that works, I'll charge the gates of hell with a water gun,
So that
defending
means
it if it makes sense, right?
That
But
means reviewing the Electricity Act.
what's that?
That means reviewing the Electricity Act, because that's where it's.
You're just dying to get that open.
Yeah, that's where it's set.
I've had it open twice.
That's where
In
it's.
the last
He
year.
knows where the
That's-
bodies are buried.
That's where it's set. That's what drives the subsidy. It's in the Electricity Act. So that's what you have to open up.
But before talking about, but before we do that, I'm not going to open up an act before we, you don't open up a patient before you do an X-ray, and you can do the examination of that.
So open it up to review.
What's that? No,
Open
no.
it up to review. The
I don't know.
act.
Maybe we're saying the same
To
thing. Maybe we're
review.
not. But
And
I
then-
don't
and
think
then-
the act has to be open to review the program. Is what I'm saying.
Let's have a committee of the legislature review the act. Let's do that. Have an all-party committee review the act, make
on the
recommendations.
LIREP program, I
about
would
what
I would
changed.
disagree with you on that. I would say that
I'd
we can
rather have a
examine.
debate on whether or not we should subsidize large industry. I think that's a healthier debate, because obviously for New Brunswickers.
Well, hold
where it's
on.
like,
That's
no,
that's
let me
a
finish.
philosophical.
Let him
No,
finish.
but
Let him
exactly, because so for New Brunswickers, like, we're in a situation where some of these smaller, rural municipalities, they've got this large industry. They're set up there, and obviously a lot of people work there. There's a history there, and they rely on that industry to run, to be able to create jobs and keep the economy spinning in their region. So for us as a province, I think what we need to know is, well, the subsidy or the help that we're giving them financially, are we getting return on our investment? as taxpayers of New Brunswick.
I was getting caught up on your use of the word subsidy, but I agree with you.
Yeah, where it's like, I think
Take,
again, it's
take,
got to be
take the
transparency.
mnemonics away
because-
from it, absolutely.
And people will understand that because, I mean, obviously Hydro-Quebec has really cheap electricity rates and they're able to, to attract these large industries who are, heavy users when it comes to electricity. So as a province here in New Brunswick, we have to ask the same question. Well, listen, if we're going to help out large industry, what are we getting in return? What positive effect is that going to
And then
have
conversely,
on
What are
governments?
they getting in return? They're getting increased profits. I mean, you're talking
But
about
back
some
up,
of the
back
most
up. Just go
profitable
one more step
industries
into what
going.
he's saying.
So
What are we getting in return? And
What's the answer? Jobs?
what's that?
What's the answer? Jobs?
Well, jobs,
No.
GDP, taxes. I mean, there's a few different.
What?
Well, listen.
those industries reduce their workforce based on technology, so that they're not about maximizing the number of people working there at their plant.
They're maximizing the amount of working people there based on the technology they can use. You can't fault any industry now because it's pulp mill. You get all fired up. But if it was another company that was modernizing and streamlining their organization, we understand that that's
No.
called progress. But because it's a pulp mill,
Okay, let him respond.
Not at all. I'm just saying, I'm pointing out your contradiction here. You're saying, oh, it's all right to subsidize them because they give us jobs.
No, hold
Right.
on.
But-
You put words in my mouth because I wasn't even done talking yet. He said, "What's in it for New Brunswickers?"
And I
Terry
said,
said, "What's
"Jobs."
that mean?" And so I threw that out there, but that's not like
And you said yes.
I said yes, but I didn't get a chance to say that. Conversely, we have to look at that and say, what is the risk of not providing that support to the organization? So it's a two-way street. What are we getting back for it in New Brunswick, and what is the risk? Now, you would dismiss it and say, there's no risk to not subsidize. See, you got me using the damn word now.
Good, well, it's correct.
But it's
Welcome
not
to the
it's
dark
not-
side.
Yeah, I know, really. But that program. So what you got to do is look at it and say, if that program didn't exist, what is the risk? And if that program does exist, what is the reward? And that's a process that I would have no
So if a
problem.
company is looking for a subsidy, let them make the case publicly before a committee of the legislature, so that it's all done in the sunshine. Everyone can see what the case is, and they can determine whether or not what government decides is appropriate. Because I can tell you, people don't want and don't believe that
Well,
these large
committee of the
profitable
legislature-
companies need these subsidies.
Fair enough, but a committee of the
look at-
legislature.
Hold on one second. Just let him
look at-
complete his point.
Look, according to Bloomberg, in the last year, Arthur Irving's wealth has gone up by over $1 billion. $1 billion.
There we go. There's the elephant in the room.
Right.
Took them what?
Well,
over
it's-
half hour
David,
to
it took a
bring
half
that
an
up?
hour to say, talk about Irving.
It's an example.
But just
It's an example.
fair enough, but,
Right?
but all jokes aside.
It's not a
But
surprise to
you
anybody.
can look at any of the companies involved, whether it's the Barlow Group or the Irvings or Brookside Management,
Sure.
who still runs, I think, Twin Rivers, and so on. I mean, they're raking it in. So all we're doing is reducing their costs a little by subsidizing their electricity.
Well, hold on. Now,
And
you're not telling the whole story there. You're not telling the whole story there.
At an
because-
expense to the other ratepayers.
Because where Keith was going was, when you've got hydro that can be provided at significantly low prices that gives those mills an opportunity to potentially have an unfair competitive advantage, that has to be part of the conversation. What you're saying is because they're big and rich, they don't deserve anything. And what we're saying is everything's
right.
got to be relative, and the examination has to be put in place to determine just exactly what advantage or disadvantage they have. If their net worth is over $1 billion, but they're offside with other jurisdictions that are much more competitive with them on electricity, then we need to look at that.
But isn't the other context that's important in that discussion is what is the impact on MB Power, its balance sheet, and its customers?
Well, like I had said, I have no issue with having a look at programs that have been around for a long time, as long as it's done in a balanced fashion. Now, a committee in the legislature, in my opinion, anything that would be done with the LIREP program would be done at very least under regulation, publicly posted for 28 days, or legislation that would be very publicly dealt with in the legislature in the House. So I wouldn't suggest forming another committee of the legislature to do it, but the public process of regulation and legislation. And at the end of
It's
the
not
day,
a very public process. We don't even call witnesses to committee to talk about the bills before us.
there's
So-
no more public house
know.
in the province of New Brunswick is the Legislative Assembly of the province of Brunswick. There's nowhere publicly than online posting where anybody can have an opportunity to have their say.
Okay,
So,
Mr. Chiasson, go
Yeah,
ahead.
like I mentioned, large industry, they're heavy users when it comes to electricity. So I think the province, like NB Power is in a situation where we're gonna have to generate new electricity. if these large industries force NB Power to invest huge amounts of money to be able to generate or to keep up with the demand, then that's got to be, that's got to be evaluated. Where it's like, okay, well, listen, we're going to subsidize them, and on top of that, we're going to have to invest, huge amounts of money just to be able to keep up with their energy needs. So I think that's where the revision is important, where it's like we have to take into account all of these factors, where it's like the return on our investment. It's, yeah, okay, they're bringing in money to the province, they're creating jobs, but at the same time, are they gouging, are they forcing the Crown Corporation to invest heavily into generating new power just to be able to supply them so they could keep the lights on?
Well, no policy program, legislation, or regulation should be scared to have solid review, absolutely. Yeah. But my thing is that it's got to be comprehensive, and it's got to take everything into consideration. And I bristle a little bit when I hear people say it's a subsidy and it's a gift and stuff like that. I believe that it's significantly more than that, and I will look forward to
what do you think the public thinks?
No more bucks for billionaires. That's the thing.
What did you just say?
No more bucks for billionaires.
See, now he just wrote a bumper sticker that's going to be that doesn't feed the narrative correctly, and then that's what becomes a problem right there.
Yeah, that's the reality.
Because and Keith talked about it before, and I've talked about it with NB Power. At the end of the day, if we get involved with the rank political back and forth. And sometimes unintended consequences of that are false narratives that get delivered to the public. And you know what? At the end of the day, that's not responsible for any of us.
What's the false narrative here?
Well,
no more bucks for billionaires. Like flip statements that are not backed up. And at the end of the day,
it's a principle. It's a principle. You've got billionaires sheltering their wealth offshore. Essentially robbing New Brunswickers for tax revenues to be getting, and we're giving them more money.
Okay, hold on a second now. Look, I'm being told that we have less than a minute. I'd love for this to go into overtime, but
I can ask the speaker for more time if you like.
yeah, that might work. I wanted to talk about SMRs and NB Power, and I did not get a chance. But boy, that was a really interesting, vigorous discussion. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah.
Boy,
really
you
good.
bring a lot of energy to the table. That's very nice. Mr. Chiasson, thank you very much for being
pleasure.
here. David Coon, thank you very much.
We do it again?
You'll have to invite us back.
Well, I'm saying, you guys are strong performers. I just want to thank Tara King-Stewart for her work today, and I want to thank Jeff Dupre, and I also want to thank Rogers for providing the studio space for this kind of conversation to happen. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time.